I sold my company for $42 million and thought I was celebrating with family. At the most luxurious restaurant in Arlington, the head of security taped my shoulder and said, "Your sister just spiked your juice." So I slipped out with the proof. Hook. Have you ever been blindsided by betrayal so deep it makes your stomach churn just thinking about it? I certainly never expected it from my own flesh and blood. I just sold my company for $42 million, $42 million. And the first thing I wanted to do was celebrate with the two people I thought loved me most. My half-sister, Chloe, and her husband, Bradley. But that night they tried to kill me. What the hell happened next? The story. Yeah, I'm Haley Brooks, a 35-year-old captain in the U.S. Army Military Police Corps. After years of deployments building a security firm in my off time. Trust me, there wasn't much of that. I finally cashed out. People always assumed someone like me, who'd seen too much of the world, would buy some fancy yacht or disappear to a private island. But I just wanted to share my good fortune. You know? To connect with family. So I booked a table at Jefferson's Cloths. If you've ever been near DC, you know the place. It's the spot. Live pianists, servers who glide like ghosts, the air thick with the smell of dry-aged beef and polished wood. It's where deals are whispered, reputations made. Tonight it was supposed to be our night. Just us. Or so I thought. I got there first, naturally. Military habit, always early. The hostess, with her knowing smile, led me to a corner booth. Prime view of the room. My eyes, they just automatically scanned exits, staff, camera placement. Old habits die hard, especially when you've spent a lifetime looking for threats. A baritone voice drifted from the piano, a classic tune. It was such a beautiful, almost sacred space. The kind of place where you truly believe nothing bad could ever happen. Then Chloe and Bradley showed up, fashionably late, of course. Chloe was in this bright red dress, screaming money she definitely didn't have. Bradley's suit was a little too snug, like he'd been skipping the gym. They put on these huge smiles. Haley. Chloe practically lunged for a hug she hadn't offered in years. Her perfume was sweet, but there was this sharp, almost aggressive edge to it. Bradley shook my hand, his grip just a little too firm, like he was trying to prove something. "You look amazing," Chloe gushed as she slid into the booth. "This place is incredible." "Yeah, well, I figured it was time to splurge," I said, handing her a menu. "It's not every day you sell a company." $42 million, Bradley repeated, his eyebrows practically shooting up to his hairline. He acted like he was just hearing it for the first time. "That's incredible, Haley. You must be so proud." I just nodded. Proud? Exhausted was more like it. He raised his glass of water like some grand toast to hard work. The waiter appeared, pouring wine for them, but for me? My usual non-alcoholic cranberry blend. "Doctor doesn't want me drinking much anymore," I told them. "It's fine. Don't miss it." Chloe's smile was rehearsed. "Now you can finally relax," she chirped. "Let us take care of you for a change." Part of me wanted to believe it, but that voice, that exact tone, it brought me right back to when we were kids and she'd try to calm me into doing her chores. She always had a way of making a demand sound like a gift. The conversation stayed light, but weirdly superficial. They'd ask about my last deployment but then cut me off before I could really answer. Then it was all about their grand plans for Europe, Bradley's dream car. Always their future, never ours. And the whole time their eyes kept flicking. To my glass. To my hands. To the waiter. It was small stuff, details most people would totally miss. But I've spent my life reading people, dissecting body language. Their excitement felt too polished, too perfect, like an ad for a happy couple. I looked at Chloe, really looked, and tried to see the girl who used to ride bikes with me on Fort Bragg, the kid who cried when I left for basic training. She just wasn't there anymore. The person across from me felt like a stranger playing a role. Dinner came, steaks, sides, the works. We cut, we chewed, we smiled. Bradley droned on about investments. Chloe dropped hints about a new house. It was all so scripted. When the plates were cleared, Bradley stood up and offered Chloe his hand. "Come on, babe," he said. "They're playing our song." Their song was some slow jazz standard from the 50s. Chloe giggled and let him lead her to the small dance floor. They moved together like they were in a life insurance commercial. I stayed seated, swirling the ice in my cranberry blend, watching the chandelier light refract off the glass. My mind drifted to my team overseas, the night shifts, the first security master plan I ever drew up. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. Mid-60s, posture like a drill sergeant, eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He was walking toward my table from the bar. Black suit, security badge on his belt. He moved with a quiet, efficient purpose. He stopped, bent slightly. "Miss Brooks." His voice was low, steady. "Yes," I said, bracing myself. "I don't mean to alarm you," he continued, his eyes flicking to the dance floor, then back to me. "But a few minutes ago, when your sister came back from the bar, I saw her pour something from a small vial into your drink." My training kicked in. My pulse didn't spike, it slowed. My world went hyper-focused. "You're sure?" I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm. "I'm sure," he said. "I didn't want to embarrass you or cause a scene, but I thought you should know." He straightened, gave a slight touch to the brim of his cap, and melted back into the restaurant's shadows. I stared at my glass. That deep red liquid, the ice cubes clicking softly. What was just a healthy drink a moment ago now felt like a ticking bomb. Every instinct screamed. Push it away, confront them, shout. Instead, I forced myself to breathe. Years of fieldwork had taught me one thing. Panic gets you killed. I reached for my napkin as if to wipe my mouth and then, oops, I accidentally knocked the glass over. Cranberry spread across the pristine white tablecloth like a crime scene photo. Clumsy me, I muttered. The waiter rushed over with a fresh cloth. While he was busy, I used the heavy folded napkin to blot the spill. My hand was rock steady. I folded the damp cloth neatly, then, quick as a flash, slid it into my coat pocket under the table. To anyone watching, it just looked like I was wiping my lap. In reality, I was securing the only evidence I had. I glanced at the dance floor. Chloe was laughing, head thrown back at something Bradley whispered. She looked radiant, happy, victorious. Bradley's smile was all teeth. Neither of them even glanced back at me. I pushed my chair back slowly, carefully, like someone who'd had a bit too much to eat. My legs carried me toward the exit, measured steps. No rush, no looking back. The valet handed me my coat without a word. Outside, the cool air hit my face like a welcome shock. I ordered a car on my phone, my thumb steady. It arrived within minutes. Sliding into the back seat, I pressed the folded napkin deeper into my pocket. The sweet, cloying smell of cranberry clung to my fingers. The city lights blurred as we pulled away from Jefferson's Prime. My breathing remained even. My mind was already racing, charting the next step. This night, this celebration had just turned into something else entirely. And every choice from this point on would matter. I leaned back into the seat as the car moved through Arlington. That napkin, still warm from my hand, was a physical anchor to the impossible. My phone vibrated against my thigh. I didn't look at the screen but at my reflection in the window. Same uniform, same straight posture, same calm face I'd worn on a dozen raids. But underneath it, a steady burn had started in my chest. A cold, hard fire. I thumbed a single contact, Cynthia. I hit call. She picked up on the second ring. Haley. I kept my voice low. I need to meet you tonight. It's urgent. I'm still at the office, she said, her tone immediately sharper. You sound different. I'll explain in person. I ended the call before she could ask more. The driver turned onto a side street. My eyes tracked the streetlights, counting down to my destination. The lab building was unassuming, tucked away in a plain business park. No signs, just a keypad and a heavy door. I punched in the code, Ironwood still paid for it. The lock clicked. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over stainless steel counters. The air smelled of bleach and ozone. A technician in a white coat looked up. Captain Brooks? Didn't expect you. I need a toxicology run, I said, my voice all business. Priority. Beta blocker panel. Heavy metals. Anything you can find. I handed him the napkin, now sealed in a clean zip bag from my coat. He took it without a word, the way you take evidence from law enforcement. He knew my background. You'll have results in an hour. I walked the hallway while I waited. Every step measured, every thought a tactical calculation. My brain built a map of options. Confront Chloe publicly? Call the local police? Call Army Side, or call nobody? Each choice had consequences. The name Brooks, with poison attached, would spread faster than any antidote. The technician returned with a tablet. Preliminaries back, he said, his eyes flicking up to mine. You were right to bring this. What is it? I asked. Metoprolol. Crushed. At least 200 milligrams absorbed on that napkin. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Enough to drop your blood pressure through the floor. In someone with a normal resting heart rate, it would look like a cardiac event. I nodded once. Print it. Sign it. Chain of custody under my name. He tapped the screen, printed the page, and handed it over. My fingers closed around it like it was a weapon. Outside, the night had gone still. Back at my apartment, the air smelled like cedar cleaner and coffee grounds. I dropped my keys on the counter, setting the lab report beside them. The napkin, sealed now in evidence tape, sat like a glaring red flag in the middle of my kitchen table. I sat, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. Chloe had been reckless before. Sure, credit cards, small lies, terrible boyfriends. But this was different. This was lethal. My training screamed for a quiet, precise response. One that wouldn't drag my name, my company, or my unit into headlines. I opened a secure messaging app and sent Cynthia my location. She arrived 20 minutes later, still in her office suit, heels clicking across my tile. What the hell happened? She asked. I slid the report toward her. Beta blocker. Enough to kill me. She scanned it, her lips tightening. She did this? Or Bradley? The guard saw her, I said. Don't know if he was involved. Cynthia leaned against the counter, arms folded. We go to the police. We hand over the report, the napkin. Let them handle it. And every news outlet gets a headline about an army captain poisoned by her sister. I countered. Try explaining to the Pentagon why your security company's founder made herself a target inside a steakhouse. We lose control the moment we go public. She exhaled slowly. Then what? We investigate quietly. We find out why. We collect everything. Then we decide. Cynthia's eyes narrowed, assessing me like she did juries. You're serious? I'm alive because a stranger warned me, I said, the words heavy. That buys us time. We use it. She nodded slowly. I can pull some strings. Former bureau people owe me favors. Background checks. Financials. Digital forensics. Do it, I said. She straightened, already scrolling through contacts. We'll need everything on Chloe and Bradley, she said into her phone. Accounts, debts, communications. If they're desperate enough to try this, there's a trail. I know there is, I thought. Cynthia paused. Haley, are you sure you're okay? I met her eyes. I'm not shaking. I'm planning. The words hung between us, heavy but steady. She nodded once and started dialing. While she talked logistics in a low voice, I opened my laptop, pulled up a blank file and began typing names, dates, details. Jefferson's Prime. Marcus Darnell. Metaprolol. Everything that had happened from the moment Chloe walked in. My fingers moved without pause. This was how I built cases in the Army. Facts first. Feelings later. Cynthia ended the call. All right. 2 former FBI, 1 former IRS investigator. Retainer covers 3 weeks of work. That's enough, I said. We'll need to bait a hook, she added. They won't confess on their own. I know how to bait, I said, closing the laptop. Outside my window, traffic hissed on wet pavement. Inside, the room held only the sound of 2 people making a plan. There was no pause for anger or grief, only steps to take. I stood, crossed to the kitchen, poured water into a glass and drank slowly. My mind built timelines. When to contact Marcus for a statement. When to get bank subpoenas through private channels. When to act. Cynthia slipped her phone into her purse. They think you're an easy mark, she said quietly. They've always underestimated me. She gave a short, dry laugh. Their mistake. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. I walked her to the door. The hallway smelled faintly of someone's dinner down the hall. She pressed my arm once. Call if you feel off, she said. I'll be fine. When the door clicked shut behind her, I went back to the table. Evidence bag. Lab report. Laptop. 3 objects. 1 problem. My hands moved automatically, arranging them in order of relevance, like pieces on a board. The city outside kept moving. Sirens in the distance. A plane overhead descending into Reagan. I sat back down and kept building my list, adding questions, outlining moves. My fingers stayed steady on the keys. My breathing stayed even. The night stretched long and quiet, but my mind was already reaching forward, step by step, toward what had to come next. The cursor blinked on my laptop screen as rows of names, times, and amounts filled the spreadsheet. I heard the faint hum of my fridge and the steady tick of the kitchen clock. My body was still, but my head was already sorting the case into boxes. Poison, motive, money, access. Years in the military police had taught me how to build a file that would stand in any room, from a battlefield briefing to a federal court. I reached for my secure phone and opened a message draft to Marcus Darnell, the security guard at Jefferson's Prime. I pulled his name and badge number from the restaurant's website. Need to speak privately? You saw something tonight? Call me. My thumb hovered over send. Hit it. A minute later, 3 dots appeared. Then a reply. Off at 0200. Can meet at coffee shop on Wilson Boulevard 0230. I put the phone down. No need to call Cynthia. She was already working her network. Instead, I opened a locked cabinet in the corner of my living room. Inside were a handful of items I hadn't needed in years. A field recorder, evidence bags, a small UV flashlight, nitrile gloves. All legal, all standard for someone with my background. I slipped the items into a plain black tote. The weight was familiar. My pulse stayed even. At 2:20 a.m., I slid into a booth at a 24-hour coffee shop, lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs. The smell of burnt espresso and fryer oil mixed in the air. Marcus sat across from me, still in his security uniform, badge off, jacket open. He looked like a man who'd spent decades watching Doors. Captain Brooks, he said quietly. Just Haley tonight. I set the tote beside me. Thank you for coming. He nodded. I figured you'd want to talk. I pulled a small recorder from the bag and set it on the table. I need you to tell me exactly what you saw in your own words. This is for my file. He didn't hesitate. Around 2015 hours, your sister walked to the bar alone. She came back with a drink in one hand, small clear vial in the other. She unscrewed it under the table, poured the contents into your glass, put the vial back in her purse. She glanced around first but didn't see me near the service door. I know what I saw. I nodded, keeping my eyes on his. Would you testify if I needed you to? He held my gaze. If it comes to that, yes. I've got nothing against her, but what she did was criminal. I reached into my bag and slid an evidence form toward him. Sign here to confirm chain of custody on your statement. He signed without question. Years of security work had made him precise. I stood, shook his hand. You probably saved my life. Glad I was there, he said. Be careful. Back in my apartment before dawn, I stored the signed statement in a locked drawer with the lab report and the sealed napkin. 3 pieces now, each one solid. Cynthia called at 6 a.m. sharp. I've got movement, she said without preamble. Our investigators already pulled public records. Chloe and Bradley are drowning. 3 credit lines maxed, business loan defaulted, tax liens, and at least 2 payday lenders with judgments. They're cornered. Keep digging, I said. They're also moving money, she added. Wire transfers from Bradley's firm to an unregistered LLC last week. We'll trace it. I looked at the clock. Good. Document everything. Assume this ends in a room with lawyers. Already on it, she said. After the call, I took a shower, dressed in plain clothes, and headed to Ironwood's old offices. I still had a pass. Inside the security vault sat hard drives of client data. I checked the logs. 2 weeks ago, someone had used a duplicate key fob to enter after hours. No sign-in, no camera footage. That narrowed the suspect list to anyone who had borrowed or stolen my credentials. I printed the access log and slid it into my bag. Another piece. On the drive back, I rehearsed a mental checklist. Physical evidence, napkin, toxicology, witness statement, Marcus, digital evidence, access logs, bank records, emails, motive, debt, opportunity, family trust, public image. At home, I opened my laptop again and began creating a master timeline. Each entry included date, time, action, and potential corroboration. Jefferson's prime, Marcus statement, lab results, Chloe's financials. The file grew by the minute. Cynthia texted me a PDF. Chloe's credit report. It read like a slow-motion crash. High-limit cards maxed. Cash advances. Late fees. A failed LLC for a lifestyle brand. I scrolled down to Bradley's. Similar pattern. Their marriage was a partnership in losing money. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't just greed. It was desperation. People who are desperate make mistakes. Mistakes leave trails. I called Cynthia. Get copies of their emails if you can. Look for anything about Ironwood clients or my medical records. Already requested, she said. One of the ex-FBI guys has a contact at their ISP. We'll have metadata soon. Good. She hesitated. You sound calm. I am, I said. Calm is how we win. I ended the call and set the phone down. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge. On the table in front of me lay the beginnings of a case no one outside this room knew existed. I opened a new document titled Operation Clean Cut. The name wasn't for drama. It was a habit from years of writing ops plans. Every plan needs a name. I wrote, Objective. Neutralize threat from Chloe and Bradley without public exposure. End state. Control of narrative. Preservation of assets. Legal leverage secured. My fingers moved down the page. Phase 1. Evidence collection. Phase 2. Confirm motive. Phase 3. Set controlled confrontation. Phase 4. Execute leverage. Outside the window, the sky was turning pale. Morning commuters filled the street below. I kept typing dates, tasks, names. Each line another piece sliding into place. I reached for the sealed evidence bag and turned it in my hands. The red stain inside had dried. It looked almost harmless now. I thought of Chloe's smile across the table. Bradley's raised glass. Not harmless at all. The phone buzzed again. A new text from one of Cynthia's investigators. Got something. Call as soon as possible. Urgent. I dialed immediately. What is it? Your sister accessed a military health database last month using a forged authorization. She downloaded your cardiac records. We have the IP timestamp and a copy of the forged form. I let out a slow breath. Send it secure. That's our smoking gun. It's on its way, he said. I hung up and opened my secure inbox. The file appeared within minutes. Clicked it. There it was. My name on a form I'd never signed. Authorization code faked. Download logs attached. Date stamped. Time stamped. I saved it to my external drive and backed it up to an encrypted folder. Now the case had motive, method, and means. I sat back, eyes on the screen, mind already shifting to what to do with it all. The plan had started as a reaction. Now it was turning into an operation. My breathing stayed steady. My hands stayed still on the keys. The morning light crept across the floor while I worked. But my focus didn't break. Every fact was a step. Every step moving closer to control. I closed the laptop and made a choice. There are moments when the obvious thing is also the worst thing. Call the police, hand over the napkin, file the report, let the system take its course. Simple. Clean. Moral. That would have satisfied a lot of people. It would have satisfied textbooks. It would also have detonated my name, my company, and my unit into news cycles I didn't trust to be accurate or kind. I walked through the options like an operations brief. Option A. Go public immediately. Pros. Fast law enforcement involvement. Official chain of custody. Possible immediate arrest if evidence held up. Cons front page stories. Investigators trolling my past contracts. Clients getting nervous. Government offices asking awkward questions about a private security company tied to a serving captain. Option B, go quiet. Assemble private evidence. Build a sealed case. Then present it where it would do the most damage to Chloe and Bradley without ripping everything else apart. Pros. Containment, control, leverage. Cons, moral hazard. Risk of mistakes. More time required. I chose containment. Make no mistake, that was a deliberate moral choice. It wasn't cowardice. It wasn't ego. It was damage control with a purpose. If I went public tomorrow and the tabloids ran with Army Captain poisoned by sister, two outcomes were likely. 1. The news would eat the story and people would forget nuance. 2. Any civil or criminal case would be messy and public for months, perhaps years. My circle, my employees, the families of men and women I led, they all would be collateral. I owed them better. Cynthia arrived 2 hours after dawn. She'd already burned through a list of contacts and updated me as she walked in. Financials, access logs, the forged authorization. She smelled like strong coffee and competence. I slid the sealed napkin and the printed lab report across the table. We can walk into the station with this, she said calmly. We can hand it to CID. Or we can build the cleanest civil intelligence case they've ever seen, and then sit in a room with options. Which gets them both locked up faster? I asked. Depends what you mean by locked up, she said. Federal charges for attempted murder, plus whatever they did with ironwood material, makes them vulnerable for a long time. But prosecution is a public process. A plea might get them time, but it also guarantees discovery. If your goal is to protect the company and your name while ensuring they lose everything, civil remedies and controlled criminal referrals give you leverage. I nodded. Legal tacticians have a vocabulary that makes vengeance sound clinical. That suited me. Do it. She smiled. Half cruel, half approving. Good. We'll open 2 threads. One criminal, confidential, routed to a DA who understands sensitive reporting. The other private. Asset freezes, subpoenas through our investigators, pulling strings to keep things off the public radar until we present. Who do you have? I asked. 2 ex-FBI with grand jury experience, an ex-IRS criminal investigator for the money trails, and a third who handles digital forensics. They already have retainer agreements signed. She handed me a list with names and a short summary of capabilities. We were asking professionals to run quiet surgical work. That's their lane. We also had to think about credibility. Marcus's statement was strong, but it was still a witness account in a crowded room. The lab report was scientific, but we needed a secure chain of custody that a prosecutor could rely on. If anything sniffed like sloppy handling, the defense would pick it apart. Chain of custody is everything, Cynthia said. We keep a sealed inventory. We log who touches what, when, and where. Everything goes in escrow with a neutral custodian. No loose ends. I set up a secure folder labeled, for legal use only. Then I drafted a short message for Marcus, thanking him formally, and letting him know we'd include his affidavit in a protected file. I asked him to preserve any camera footage the restaurant might have, and not to discuss anything with anyone. Simple instructions delivered without drama. Next, I called a bank contact who knew how to place a freeze quietly. Banks don't like freezing accounts, but they'll do it with the right legal pressure. The idea was straightforward, choke off liquidity. If Chloe and Bradley couldn't move cash, their options dwindled. Predators get desperate when their prey locks the safe. I sat back and thought about motive again. The credit reports Cynthia had sent me weren't pretty. High-interest loans, payday lenders, defaulted lines, a business loan that had gone sideways. People in that situation become transactional about risk. They imagine a quick, irreversible fix. I didn't need to psychoanalyze them beyond that. I only needed to show it to the right people with the right documents. Cynthia worked the phones. I worked the timeline. We created a non-public audit trail that could be handed to a prosecutor confidentially. The DA we preferred had handled cases with national security implications before. She had contacts inside the U.S. Attorney's Office who could coordinate a discreet preliminary review. That mattered. Publicity is its own prosecution. We also had to think about optics within the Army. I considered going to JAG, Judge Advocate General, but there's bureaucracy in every corner of the military. I owed my unit the truth eventually, but the immediate priority was containment. I briefed a trusted mentor via secure channel, an Army LTC who owed me favors and understood the cost of public spectacle. He advised patience and suggested the same as Cynthia preferred. He didn't flinch at the idea of a private approach, legal and administrative levers in place. The next task was documentary. We had the napkin, lab report, Marcus's signed statement, the access log showing after-hours entry, the forged medical authorization with IP stamps, and bank anomalies. But chains of evidence don't tie themselves into airtight ropes. They require precise handling. That meant I needed copies clean, verified, time-stamped, and secure uploads to an escrow system. It meant witnesses put on record but not in the press. It meant that when we finally presented this to Chloe and Bradley, we did so from a position of total control. We could offer them a choice with real consequences, backed by evidence that a prosecutor would find hard to ignore. We built a dossier, timeline documents, witness statements, forensics. Each piece had a margin note about where it came from and why it mattered. My spreadsheet looked like a dossier a brigade commander would review before a mission. I felt oddly comfortable. Planning is my comfort zone. There were moral gray areas. How far to push? What legal pressure to apply? Whether to demand full forfeiture before offering leniency. Cynthia argued for a staged approach. First immobilize assets, then present evidence privately with a clear path. An exile from the family fortune, or immediate referral to law enforcement with no plea options. The choice we'd offer would be brutal but clean. People like choices, Cynthia said. Give them two terrible options rather than one sweet escape. I laughed, a short dry sound. That's how you get confessions. We also prepped for pushback. If they hired counsel, fine. We'd present the evidence and let Discovery rip apart their story. If they fled, the investigators already had international alerts set for known accounts and a watch on any purchases or transfers. If they tried a PR strike, we prepared a boilerplate public statement. We are cooperating with authorities. No further comment. Keep it sparse, infuriating, and true. By mid-afternoon, the investigators had pulled initial records. One of the ex-FBI guys called to tell me they'd located suspicious transfers tied to a Shell LLC with ties to a lender in New Jersey. The IRS guy already had a notice flagged for deeper review. They were focusing on drying up funds and mapping who within their circles benefited from the transfers. I sat for a minute and allowed myself a small private joke. I had spent the better part of my adult life keeping people from doing dumb, dangerous things. Now I was stopping a different kind of danger, one that wore a familiar face across the table. The rest of the day moved in focused increments. Calls, verification, legal templates, bank holds. Each action peeled away another layer of ambiguity. Each confirmation made a simple truth clearer. This was not a moment to be moralistic. In public, it was a moment to be surgical, effective, and exact. At dinner that night I ate alone. The city moved around me. My phone buzzed intermittently with updates. A subpoena issued. A bank freeze requested, metadata pulled. The operation had momentum. That was all I asked for, movement in the right direction. The low light of my apartment made the folders on the table look heavier than they were. The night outside was dead quiet. Inside it was the opposite. Cynthia's phone buzzed every few minutes with updates from the investigators. Each ping was another stitch pulled from a fabric I had been pretending was still whole. She pushed a fresh set of printed summaries across to me without a word. I read the headers first. Unsecured loans, second mortgage, gambling markers, jewelry pawned under an alias. Then I scanned the details. Numbers I recognized from Chloe's accounts. Bradley's signature on a hard money loan agreement. Overdue statements from private lenders whose business model wasn't exactly above board. They're drowning, Cynthia said flatly. And they've been drowning for years. It was one thing to suspect desperation. It was another to see it documented in black and white, with bank logos and signatures. The facade they built, the curated photos, the breezy talk of new business ventures, the exotic vacations was a stage set. Behind it, their finances were a demolition zone. They're $2 million in the hole, Cynthia continued, sliding a page over so I could see the total at the bottom. If they don't get a cash infusion, everything collapses within months. Foreclosure notices are already prepared. Lenders have started calling. I stared at the total. My sister had spent years leaning on me for small helping transfers. I told myself she just had bad luck. In reality, she'd been running a 3-act tragedy, funded by my patients. Bradley was no better. He'd used his consulting firm as a personal ATM, cashing client retainers to cover gambling debts and personal travel. The next folder hit harder. Inside were still images taken from gallery security cameras and text transcripts from recorded calls. The dates lined up perfectly with the days Chloe had dropped by to check on me. Each visit matched a new batch of high-resolution photos sent to appraisers and galleries. She wasn't bringing soup out of kindness. She was casing my home like a burglar. She's not just planning to take your money, Cynthia said, her voice clipped. She's liquidating your history. The photos were of things that weren't even valuable to anyone but me. Medals, framed commendations, old unit photos, my late mother's furniture. Mixed in were shots of the more obviously sellable items. Artwork, silver, a rare rifle inherited from our grandfather. Chloe's email to one gallery was polite and professional. She wrote about me as if I were already gone. My sister is terminally ill. We're preparing her estate. She listed items with estimated prices. I felt something shift inside me then. Not hot rage but a cold clarity. This wasn't about one impulsive act at a restaurant. This was a systematic process that had been running for months. She'd forged a medical authorization to pull my health records, studied them for weaknesses, planned the poisoning, and in parallel, prepped for a private liquidation of anything else of value. Bradley's role wasn't passive. The investigators had traced calls from his phone to 2 of the lenders, and to a fixer known for brokering under-the-table sales of restricted goods. They had bank records showing him wiring retainer fees to a law firm that specialized in shielding assets from civil seizure. This was premeditated on every level. Cynthia looked at me, waiting for my reaction. "You're not surprised," she said finally. "I'm done being surprised," I answered. "I'm just confirming." We went through the rest systematically. House deeds, title histories, 2 vehicles leased under a shell company, a storage unit in another state containing items from my parents' house I hadn't even realized were missing. Every fact was another brick in the wall of motive. The evidence didn't read like a tabloid plot. It read like a corporate audit of a failing business. Assets, liabilities, risk factors, exit strategy. My sister had turned me into a line item on her survival plan. Cynthia slid the final page across the table. A printout of search terms traced to a public library computer. Lethal dosage beta blockers. How to fake natural death. Will autopsy detect metoprolol overdose? It was clinical, impersonal, and devastating. I exhaled slowly. "They're thorough. They're sloppy enough to leave a trail," Cynthia replied. "And now we have it." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a car passed, its tires hissing on wet pavement. Inside, the sound of the refrigerator kicking on felt like a gunshot. "Next step is presenting this to the DA quietly," she said. "But before we go that route, you need to decide what you want. Criminal trial with headlines, or a surgical strike that wipes them out financially and leaves them exposed if they ever try to retaliate." I kept my eyes on the photos of Chloe holding my coffee mug, smiling for my door camera on the day she'd visited. The smile looked almost tender. It was a lie. "We go surgical," I said. "Then we'll tighten the noose quietly," Cynthia replied. She began making calls in low, precise tones, arranging legal holds, drafting letters to banks and galleries to flag suspicious transactions, and lining up sworn affidavits from appraisers. Her efficiency was its own kind of mercy. It kept me from thinking about family dinners, birthdays, or childhood road trips. I focused on the plan instead. The team would continue gathering evidence until every asset, every loan, every false statement, and every attempted sale was mapped. When the moment came, Chloe and Bradley would walk into a room thinking they were about to sign inheritance papers, and instead find themselves facing a wall of irrefutable facts, with no exit. I wasn't interested in humiliation for its own sake. I wanted a clean break. Remove the money, remove the access, remove the leverage. No public circus, no appeals to sympathy. Just a signed agreement, a handover, and a permanent cutoff. Cynthia finished her calls and looked at me. "We're going to need you to keep acting like nothing's wrong. If they sense a shift, they'll lawyer up differently." I nodded once. Playing the part of the oblivious older sister would be the hardest task I'd ever performed, harder than any deployment or negotiation. But it was necessary. She left with the folders, promising secure storage and a fresh set of updates by morning. I sat at the table a long time after she'd gone, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. On the wall across from me hung a framed unit citation. I stared at it and thought about loyalty, about betrayal, about the difference between the people you choose to stand with and the ones you're born into. The night stretched on. My phone buzzed again with another update. This time, a digital forensics hit on Bradley's burner phone, connecting him to a new account at an online casino. It was just one more proof point, another weight on their side of the scale. I saved it to the secure folder without a word and began drafting a new list of tasks for the morning. The plan was no longer theoretical. It was operational, and every operational detail mattered. I booked the conference room on the 40th floor of the Crystal City Tower for Tuesday at 10 a.m. Booking the room was the smallest part of the operation, and also the most literal symbol of control. Crystal City was neutral, professional, and importantly private. No brass plaques, no glossy lobby brochures. The elevator code, the security desk contact, and the assistant's name all went into a single secure note on my phone. I set the meeting under the pretext of signing preliminary trust documents, so Chloe and Bradley would come expecting celebration, not interrogation. Step 1 was the choreography. Cynthia and I mapped every minute of the morning into a simple sequence. Arrival, small talk, coffee, initial paperwork, the signing, then the reveal. We assigned roles. Cynthia would open. She had the voice for it. Calm, direct, legal. 2 investigators would sit at a corner table with folders that looked routine. A third would be on a private line with the DA, ready to confirm facts if needed. Marcus would be on standby at Jefferson's Prime to secure any last-minute evidence and to confirm his statement if a subpoena required. I would be the quiet center, the one who appeared weak and grateful. The documents were the next priority. Anything sloppy could be used against us. Cynthia's team drafted an innocuous-looking, family investment trust packet cover sheet. Preliminary terms, signature lines, intended to lure. Hidden inside the legal pile were the heavy things. The toxicology lab report, Marcus's signed affidavit, the forged medical authorization with the IP logs, bank summaries, and the investigator's initial forensics printouts. Each sensitive item had a front page with an internal reference number and a notarized chain of custody cover. We printed 2 sets. One for our attorney escrow and one for the DA, each with timestamps and seals. Escrow and custody were non-negotiable. Cynthia arranged for a neutral custodian, a trust company that would hold originals and record every handoff. We didn't take chances with memory or rumor. Originals went into sealed envelopes, logged and sealed again. Photocopies were bound into a blue folder that looked like routine paperwork you sign at a bank. The contrast was intentional. Money control was tactical. The investigators had already started the asset tracing process. Subpoenas in motion, preliminary holds requested. You can't always get a bank to freeze an account on demand, but you can build legal pressure that makes movement risky. We arranged emergency notices to be ready for filing with courts in jurisdictions where Chloe and Bradley had accounts. If they tried to siphon funds the morning of the meeting, there would be a fast path to injunctions. The point wasn't to pretend we had instant power. It was to ensure any attempt to flee would trigger immediate legal consequences. We rehearsed the script. "We'll need you both to come in around 10 o'clock, Cynthia would say on the phone, to sign some preliminary trust documents. Nothing heavy, just paperwork. I practiced my tired, relieved tone for hours. Acting is part of this business. If they suspected a setup, they would call counsel or walk. The goal required them to be comfortable and convinced the prize was within reach. Technology needed rules. Phones would be off or collected on arrival. We rented a small tech lockbox used by secure meetings to hold devices. For the record, we planned to allow them one phone each in case someone insisted on keeping it. That would be part of the test. Bradley had a known habit of checking accounts in real time. If he reached for his phone during the meeting, an investigator's note would record the movement. The tactics were simple. Limit options, increase certainty. Witnesses were positioned. Marcus would not attend the meeting. His role was the initial observer and a backup witness for the restaurant timeline. But we had two discreet witnesses who would sign affidavits later if a prosecutor asked. The investigators would remain visible enough to remind Chloe and Bradley that this was more than family business. Their presence would be casual, not threatening. A silent reminder that professionals were watching. We also prepared an exit path for them. An ugly but quick option. Cynthia drafted the settlement terms. Sign a document relinquishing any claim to my estate, transferring any items or data taken from my home and company, surrendering access keys and passwords, and agreeing to leave my life and my business alone forever. The alternative would be immediate referral to a DA with the materials we had ready, and a civil action to strip assets. The choice was intended to be between two bad outcomes: legal ruin or financial exile. Both were enforceable. That was crucial. Cynthia asked the investigators to prepare a clear chronological presentation. No theatrics, no dramatic reveals, just facts, dates, and signed documents. The legal mind appreciates clarity. The presentation would open with the lab results and Marcus's signed statement, the most direct evidence of the attempt. Then we'd layer motive. Bank records, purchase histories, the gallery communications showing attempts to liquidate items from my home, and the forged authorization that proved premeditation. Each layer built on the previous one. A defense strategy would be harder to mount when each thread connected cleanly to another. We double-checked chain of custody. The napkin, the lab report, Marcus's affidavit, and the forged authorization all had unique identifiers. We documented who handled each original and why. The investigators photographed every step of the process and timestamped the photos. Everything went into a secure digital vault with read-only access for Cynthia and her chosen DA contact. If any piece was questioned, the audit trail would show the truth. One more tactical move was to time the meeting when banks were open. If Chloe and Bradley reacted by attempting transfers, the bank would be awake and reachable for service of process. That small detail is the difference between a hurried transfer and a transaction halted by legal paperwork. We coordinated with our bank contact to ensure a fast response window for any emergency filings. I practiced the brief that Cynthia gave me until I could say it with bland sincerity. I want to put the family finances in order. Sign these preliminary trust forms so we can move quickly. It needed to sound like generosity and inevitability. It had to be a sugar-coated hook. The trap would be revealed only when the evidence lay on the table and the legal options were clear. Finally, we ran what-if scenarios. What if they lawyered up instantly? Fine. We'd present the evidence and let Discovery rip apart their story. What if they fled? The investigators already had international alerts set for known accounts and a watch on any purchases or transfers. What if they tried a PR strike? We prepared our short public statement. We are cooperating with authorities. No further comment. Sparse and damaging to any counter-narrative. The last piece was personal. I had to commit to the face I would show that day. Acting weary and hopeful would be difficult. Part of me wanted to stand, scream, and break things. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone and call the police and let the world sort the rest. Instead, I chose discipline. That discipline is what I trained for. It's what kept soldiers alive and leaders effective. On Friday, I called Chloe and Bradley and left a message with Cynthia's assistant. We'd like to see you Tuesday to sign paperwork for the family trust. Nothing formal, just preliminary. Please come at 10 o'clock. The message sounded warmly indifferent, like an invitation to brunch. I closed my laptop, set the secure folder on the kitchen table, and ran my hand over the sealed napkin once, a simple steady motion. Then I rehearsed my smile in the hallway mirror, not for vanity, but because I needed it to be convincing. I adjusted my shirt and checked my watch. I confirmed the room, confirmed the escrow, confirmed Marcus would preserve any footage, and confirmed the investigators were ready. Then I called Cynthia one last time that evening to run through the sequence. Her voicemail picked up on the second ring. I left a concise note. We're set. Control the room. No leaks. Over. I hung up and turned off the lights, leaving the house in a quiet state that looked ordinary to anyone peeking in. I didn't go to bed immediately. I reviewed the timeline one more time, and then finally let the house settle around me. Rain slid down the window of my apartment in thin vertical lines while the clock on the wall ticked through another hour. My laptop screen glowed with spreadsheets, legal documents, and a color-coded schedule that looked more like an operations plan than a family meeting. I had gone over every step with Cynthia and her team. Now it was just execution. She called once more, her voice steady but low. Everything's in place. Security desk has your guest list. Our people will arrive 30 minutes early. The custodian has the originals. Phone's locked. I asked. Lockbox delivered and tested. It reads badges on entry. No one gets to walk in and livestream anything. I ended the call and walked to the kitchen. The smell of brewed coffee was the only warm thing in the room. I poured it into a plain mug and sipped. No whiskey, no distractions. The last 24 hours before any high-risk operation were always the quietest and the hardest. The checklist on the table was broken into 5 columns. Legal, security, evidence, optics, and psychological. Each had subpoints. Legal was Cynthia's realm. Final review of settlement papers, execution page flagged for signatures, affidavit templates for immediate filing if needed. Security covered the elevator codes, the reception desk, and 2 plainclothes investigators stationed as consultants in the corner of the room. Evidence included every document and photo printed on heavy stock with reference numbers and seals. Optics meant neutral decor. No hint of hostility. Refreshments on the sideboard. Psychological was my job. My posture, my tone, the expression on my face when Chloe and Bradley walked in. I reheated dinner. I barely tasted it and sat at the table running the script out loud. My voice had to sound tired but generous. This is just preliminary paperwork. I want to make sure you're taken care of. We'll finalize everything soon. It had to sound like a woman smoothing a legacy, not a captain preparing an ambush. Cynthia had advised me to sleep. I tried lying on my back staring at the ceiling. Instead of sleep, my mind sorted through contingencies. What if they refused to sign? Then we pivoted to the DA and filed everything we had. What if they walked out? The asset freezes and subpoenas were timed to go live that morning. What if they tried to bluff? The evidence spoke for itself. The rain eased near midnight. I stood at the window and looked down at the city grid. Lights glowing in the wet streets. No drama, no speeches, just planning. In another life, I would have been prepping a briefing for an early flight. The same nerves, the same discipline. At dawn, I dressed in a plain navy suit. No uniform, no ribbons. A neutral watch, simple shoes. I packed a slim briefcase with nothing personal inside. Only a single copy of the invitation letter to make the setup look authentic. Everything else was already staged at the tower. By 7 a.m. I was in Cynthia's office. She was behind her desk, hair tied back, coffee in hand, eyes clear and sharp. The conference room down the hall was already prepped. Polished table, high-back chairs, discreet pitchers of water and glasses. Along the far wall sat a neat row of blue folders. The lockbox for phones had a small sign taped to it. For your convenience during signing. Review, she said, sliding a bullet point sheet across the desk. We went through the plan one more time. 10 o'clock arrival, warm greeting, casual tone. She would start with routine trust language, hand them the pen for the dummy form, and once their guard was down, she would slide out the evidence folders one by one. No raised voices, no accusations, just the slow, precise unveiling of facts they couldn't refute. At the point of maximum impact, she would present the 2 options. Sign the settlement and walk away with nothing, or face immediate referral to the DA with a pre-assembled case file. Our investigators were already in the building. One would act as an assistant delivering additional documents, but in reality recording timestamps of everything said and done. Another sat in the lobby watching arrivals. A third monitored Chloe and Bradley's bank accounts remotely to catch any last-minute transfers. Marcus remained on call to secure restaurant video evidence for chain of custody. I walked into the conference room and took the seat farthest from the door. From that angle, the skyline was a wall of glass and steel. I placed my hands on the table, testing how they looked. Steady, palms relaxed, no clenching. Acting the oblivious sister required stillness more than words. Cynthia tested the microphones. Not for recording, but for the DA's live line if we needed immediate confirmation. She checked the lockbox for phones and the sealed envelopes one last time. Everything was symmetrical and neat. Ready? She asked. Yes, I said. We fell silent. The room smelled faintly of furniture polish and coffee. Outside the window, the city moved like a grid of ants, unaware of what was about to happen high above. I reviewed my own notes one final time. Greet Chloe warmly. Shake Bradley's hand. Sit slowly, as if still recovering from a health scare. Smile faintly. Let Cynthia do the talking until the moment she hands me the cue. Then stay quiet and let the evidence speak. I checked my watch. 9:15. Time moved in exact, clean segments. Downstairs, the receptionist had my guest list. Security was briefed on names and IDs. The lockbox key was in Cynthia's pocket. The investigators texted updates from the lobby. Bradley checked his phone twice while waiting for coffee. Chloe seemed distracted but cheerful, both dressed sharply. They were exactly the image they wanted to project. I took a slow breath and let it out. Everything that could be controlled was controlled. Everything else would reveal itself in the room. Cynthia looked at me from across the table. Remember, no speeches. Just let the documents do the work. I know, I said. I picked up the dummy trust folder, flipped through its blank signature pages, and placed it in front of my seat. I practiced one last line under my breath. I just want to get this done so you can move forward. It sounded ordinary, unremarkable, the perfect camouflage. The clock on the wall moved to 9:45. Outside the hallway door, the assistant began setting glasses on the sideboard. The hum of the building's air system was steady and low. I adjusted my chair a fraction of an inch, centered my hands on the table, and looked at the skyline again. My reflection stared back from the glass, unreadable. Everything was staged. The room was neutral. The plan was live. The elevator doors opened at exactly 9:59, and their reflection flickered on the polished floor before they even stepped inside the room. Chloe went first. A bright dress that looked expensive but chosen to seem respectable. Her hair perfectly styled. Bradley followed in a tailored suit I hadn't seen before. His tie a little too bold for a legal appointment. They looked like people walking into a photo op, not a reckoning. I stood as they entered, one hand lightly on the back of my chair. Good morning, I said, my voice low and warm. Chloe leaned in and kissed my cheek. A practiced smile that reached just enough of her eyes to appear sincere. You look so much better, she said. I told you rest would help. Bradley extended his hand. Captain, he said with a grin. Ready to sign our future? I took his hand's steady grip, eyes soft. Just paperwork, I said. Let's get comfortable. Cynthia stepped forward. Professional but pleasant. Her dark blazer neat. Her voice brisk but not cold. Please have a seat, she said. We'll get water and coffee in a moment. Phones in the lockbox, please. House rules. Bradley chuckled. Of course. He and Chloe both placed their phones inside the small black box on the sideboard, the magnetic lid closing with a quiet click. No protest, no hesitation. They sat opposite me at the long table, the skyline behind me glowing in the late morning light. They clasped hands across the polished wood. Cynthia opened the dummy folder first. Thank you for coming. As you know, Captain Brooks has asked me to prepare the preliminary documentation for a family investment trust. Nothing final today, just an overview and a few signatures so we can proceed. Bradley nodded eagerly, leaning slightly forward. Chloe glanced at me, her eyes scanning my face for weakness. I kept my expression neutral, even faintly tired. Cynthia spoke evenly, flipping pages as she went. This is the draft charter for the Brooks Family Trust. It lays out general terms, beneficiaries, and administrative powers. Standard language. At this stage, we'll need your signatures on these acknowledgement pages to move forward. She slid a pen toward Bradley, who took it with a small smile. Exciting day, he said. Chloe squeezed his hand and took the pen second. We're honored, she murmured. Cynthia let them sign the blank acknowledgement pages without comment. Then she placed the pen aside and adjusted the stack of blue folders in front of her, aligning the edges with deliberate precision. Before we proceed further, she said, her tone shifting just enough to command attention, there are some preliminary items we're required to address under Virginia law when creating a trust of this magnitude. Oh, Bradley's smile faltered a hair. Preliminary items? Yes, Cynthia said. She opened the first blue folder and slid a single document across the table to them. The sound of paper on wood was louder than it should have been. This is a toxicology report from a certified private laboratory, she said. It concerns a sample collected from Captain Brooks's table at Jefferson's Prime on the evening of August 14th. Chloe blinked. What? Bradley frowned and looked down at the paper. The summary at the top was clear and direct. Metoprolol. At a concentration 25 times the therapeutic dose. A clinical note describing the near certainty of fatal myocardial infarction in a patient with a documented cardiac history. Cynthia's voice didn't change. The sample was sealed, transported, and tested under documented chain of custody. The lab director and the collecting witness have both signed affidavits. Chloe's mouth opened but no sound came out. Bradley kept staring at the paper, his thumb rubbing the edge of the page as if the words might change under his touch. Cynthia opened the second blue folder and slid another document beside the first. This is a consolidated financial report prepared by independent investigators. It summarizes 2 delinquent mortgages, multiple high-interest loans, and a combined unsecured debt exceeding $2 million. It also notes attempts to secure additional credit in the past 90 days. On 6, Chloe pulled her hand from Bradley's and sat back slightly, her face pale now. I don't understand, she whispered. Cynthia continued without looking up. She opened the 3rd folder and placed printouts of gallery emails on the table. These are communications sent from your devices to various art galleries and private brokers. They describe Captain Brooks as terminally ill and list items from her home for private sale, including personal effects and restricted memorabilia. The images attached to these emails were taken surreptitiously during visits to her residence. This is corroborated by timestamped security footage. Bradley turned to look at Chloe, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. Cynthia opened the 4th and final folder. This one contained a forged medical power of attorney with Chloe's signature as authorized party, IP logs showing access to Captain Brooks's complete health record, and a series of search terms traced to burner devices, lethal dosage beta blockers. How to fake natural death. Will autopsy detect metoprolol overdose? She placed the stack carefully on top of the other documents. The room was silent except for the low hum of the building's air system. Chloe stared at the table, her hands trembling. Bradley's face had gone from smug to ashen in less than 5 minutes. I kept my hands flat on the table and spoke for the first time since the greeting. My voice was calm even. There is no family trust, Chloe. There never was. Her head snapped up. What are you? Cynthia cut her off gently but firmly. The entirety of Captain Brooks's estate has already been transferred into an irrevocable charitable foundation. It is legally operational. You have no access to it and never will. Bradley swallowed hard. You can't just. I can, I said, still calm. And I did. Cynthia picked up a separate folder, thicker than the rest, and set it in front of them with a pin on top. You have 2 options, she said, her tone clipped but not theatrical. Option 1. This evidence in its entirety is delivered to the district attorney's office before noon today, accompanied by sworn affidavits. You will both be charged with conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. The case file is ready and the DA is expecting it. Option 2. You sign this agreement immediately. You relinquish any and all claims to Captain Brooks's estate, surrender any property or items taken from her home or company, and agree to have no further contact with her or her affairs. In return, she will not press charges at this time. The evidence will remain in escrow, to be delivered to the authorities only if you violate the agreement. She folded her hands on the table and looked at them steadily. Take a moment to decide. Neither of them reached for the pen. Bradley stared at the documents as if they might vanish. Chloe looked at me, tears forming but not falling. I held her gaze but felt nothing. You used my trust as a weapon, I said quietly. Now the only thing left between you and prison is a signature. The assistant entered silently and set glasses of water at each place. Neither Chloe nor Bradley touched theirs. Cynthia slid the pen slightly closer. Sign or face charges. Those are the only 2 paths left. The city outside moved on. Cars gliding down wet streets, horns distant and muted. Inside the room the air felt heavier than concrete. Bradley finally reached out, his hand shaking, and picked up the pen. He didn't look at Chloe. He signed his name on the line Cynthia indicated, the ink dark against the paper. He pushed it toward her without a word. Chloe stared at the document. Her lips pressed tight. Her hand hovered over the pen, then dropped. She picked it up slowly, tears blurring the page, and signed beneath Bradley's name. The ink smudged where her fingers touched it. Cynthia took the signed pages, flipped them closed, and secured them with a binder clip. She slid the folder into her briefcase, and locked it with a small click. No one moved for a long moment. The only sound was the steady hum of the HVAC and the faint clatter of traffic below. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping the polished floor with a muted sound. My voice was level and final. We're done here. Chloe's eyes flicked to mine, searching for some trace of the sister she once knew. Bradley stared at the table as if it might open and swallow him. Neither spoke. Cynthia rose as well, her expression unreadable. She gestured toward the door. The assistant opened it without a word. Chloe and Bradley stood, moving stiffly, and walked out past the silent investigators in the corner. The lockbox clicked as they retrieved their phones. The door closed behind them with a soft but decisive thud. I stayed standing, hands at my sides, breathing steady. The room smelled of paper, coffee, and the faint metallic tang of fear left behind. Outside the window, the skyline was still bright and indifferent. Inside, every piece was finally where it needed to be. The conference room door had barely clicked shut when I exhaled, a slow, measured breath that felt like it had been held for months. Cynthia was already moving, gathering the folders with gloved hands, placing them into 2 hard-sided cases with numbered seals. Each case had a matching tamper-evident tag. She didn't speak until the last document was clipped and secured. That's signed, she said quietly. Escrow is active now. They're out of your life legally until they try to violate it, I said. She met my eyes. If they do, we refer the entire file. The DA will handle it. That's not your burden anymore. I nodded once. The relief wasn't joy. It was structural, like a weight removed from a rucksack after a long march. My spine straightened. My hands felt steady again. All the training about operations, evidence, and containment had led to this moment. The investigators stood from their corner seats. One of them handed me a small flash drive in a sealed pouch. Chain of custody video. We recorded the entire meeting for our own record. 2 angles, time-stamped. Good, I said. Stored off-site, secure encryption. He nodded and left with the others, each carrying their assigned cases and drives. Within minutes, the room was empty except for me and Cynthia. The table looked like any other boardroom table again. Polished, bare, anonymous. We walked out together. The elevator hummed softly as it descended. On the street, cars moved in the normal rhythm of late morning. No one glancing at us. No headlines scrolling across the sky. I slipped my hands into my pockets and felt the edge of my watch, the only personal thing I'd worn all day. Cynthia hailed a cab, but I shook my head. I'll walk. Haley, she began. I need air. She squeezed my shoulder briefly. We did exactly what we planned. Everything's documented. You're protected. Go home and breathe. I gave her a faint smile and started down the sidewalk. The day was bright and windless. My footsteps on the pavement sounded louder than they should have. I passed a food truck, the smell of grilled onions cutting through the city's exhaust. Ordinary life continued without pause. By the time I reached my apartment, my body had moved into post-operation mode. Cataloging, storing, clearing space. I hung my jacket, washed my hands, and opened the secure cabinet one last time. Inside, the duplicate set of evidence sat untouched. I checked the seals, confirmed the tags, then locked it again. The keys went into a small lockbox that required both a code and a fingerprint. Then I sat at my kitchen table and dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring. Everything go okay? It's handled, I said simply. Thank you for your help. You don't need to thank me, he said. I saw what I saw. People like that. They always think nobody's watching. They'll be watched now, I said. He hesitated. You good? I'm upright, I said. That's enough for today. We ended the call. I set the phone down and stared at the muted glow of the laptop screen. The master timeline, once a jigsaw puzzle of risk and motive, was now complete. Each line crossed out with a neat black bar. Napkin tested. Witness secured. Forged authorization traced. Assets frozen. Settlement signed. The phone buzzed again. Cynthia texting a brief update. Day notified receipt of settlement. File under seal. Everything locked. Short, precise, exactly the language I needed. I stood and walked to the window. Below, the city stretched out, glass towers and intersections, people with coffees and bags and phones. I pressed my palm against the cool pane. No speech, no adrenaline, no crowd, just an operation concluded. I poured water into a glass and drank slowly. The taste was metallic from the tap. For a moment, my eyes flicked to the framed unit citation on the wall. The same one I'd stared at when I first realized what Chloe had done. In my unit, when a mission ended, we debriefed, wrote reports, cleaned gear. We didn't celebrate. We reset for whatever came next. I felt myself falling into that rhythm. Now I opened my laptop again, started a final document labeled, After Action Report. It wasn't for the Army. It was for me. I wrote in simple bullet points. Objective: neutralize internal threat. Method: private investigation. Legal leverage. Outcome: settlement signed. Assets secured. Evidence in escrow. Risk: minimal public exposure. Status: operation concluded. Under lessons learned, I typed a single line. Family can be a blind spot. Then I closed the file and encrypted it. The doorbell rang once. Sharp and unexpected. I moved to the door and looked through the peephole. A courier stood there holding a slim package. I opened the door, signed the tablet, and took the envelope. Inside was a formal confirmation from the trust custodian. Settlement agreement and release received. Originals under seal. A notary stamp glistened in blue at the bottom. I set it on the table. Everything now had a seal or a signature. No loose ends. I took a shower, the hot water running over my shoulders, and let my mind finally start to drift. Not to nostalgia or regret, just to nothing. When I stepped out, the apartment smelled like soap and paper. I dressed in clean clothes, made a simple lunch, and ate it standing at the counter. In the afternoon, Cynthia called again. Bank freezes went through, shell accounts flagged. Any movement will trigger automatic notices to our team. They're boxed in. Good, I said. Let them box themselves further. She hesitated. Haley, you understand how rare it is to pull this off without a leak? Yes, I said. You did everything right. You kept your head. That's not easy when it's family. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound like a platitude. She filled the silence. We'll keep monitoring quietly for a few months. If they violate the agreement even once, the DA will file. You won't have to do anything. I gave a small laugh. Dry but not bitter. I'm not planning to. After we hung up, I walked through the apartment, touching objects without thinking. The edge of a photo frame, the back of a chair, the smooth metal of the lock on the evidence cabinet. Everything was still in its place. Nothing had been taken, nothing poisoned, nothing left to guess. The evening light shifted across the floorboards. I pulled on a jacket and went outside, walking aimlessly through the neighborhood. People walked dogs, argued on phones, pushed strollers. Nobody knew what had happened high in that conference room. That was the point. Real consequences don't need an audience. I reached a small park and sat on a bench. The air smelled of cut grass and traffic. I leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to a jogger's shoes on the path, a child laughing by the swings. The world moved on without me needing to manage it. When I finally stood and started back, the sky over the city was streaked with orange and purple. I slipped my hands into my pockets and felt the smooth edge of my watch again. The glass towers caught the fading light. My steps were unhurried, deliberate. Everything essential had been handled. The morning after everything was sealed, the apartment was quiet in a way that felt new. No folders on the table, no glow of the laptop through the night, no list of contingencies taped inside a notebook. For the first time in weeks, my calendar was empty. I poured coffee into a mug and leaned against the counter, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. The silence didn't feel like a void, felt like space. Space to decide what came next without having to watch my own family like a threat. Space to think about the life I'd built in uniform and in business, and what kind of mark I could leave when I was done fighting. I opened my laptop one more time and logged into the foundation account, the irrevocable trust Cynthia had helped create long before this confrontation. The Alicia Hayes Foundation's homepage loaded, the logo simple and unadorned. Under programs were the initiatives I'd pushed for. Grants for female veterans transitioning out of active duty, a PTSD K-9 program pairing trained dogs with combat veterans, and a scholarship fund for military families studying criminal justice. Each line item had a status update, a dollar amount, a photo of someone already helped. I scrolled through the numbers. The assets that would have been carved up in lawsuits and fake invoices were now committed to programs with real names attached. A grant for a Marine sergeant who'd lost both legs. A therapy dog already training for an Air Force medic. A housing stipend for a National Guard single mother finishing college. It wasn't abstract anymore. It was measurable. I added a new directive. A legal clinic for service members facing financial exploitation by family. Not a revenge project but a prevention one. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent months building a case against my own sister. Now I could build a shield for others before they got that far. The foundation's board, mostly women I'd served with, plus a few civilians with legal expertise, had been briefed on what happened. They didn't know names or details, but they knew enough to understand the urgency. They'd approved an emergency allocation for victim support services and greenlit my proposal to fund investigative training for military spouses and veterans entering private security. It was a way to channel anger into structure. Cynthia called mid-morning. Her voice was softer now, almost casual. Everything's holding. Banks confirmed the freezes. The DA filed our notice of settlement and sealed the file. You're officially clear. Thank you, I said. You don't need to thank me. You did the hard part. We spoke briefly about the foundation, the new clinic, and a quiet plan to hire Marcus as head of security for the next gala. He'd refused a cash reward, but had agreed to consider a job offer. Good men like that are rare, Cynthia said. Keep him close. After the call, I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The city was the same, but it no longer felt like a chessboard. I thought about the years of training that had taught me to be calm under pressure, to plan 3 moves ahead, to see patterns in chaos. Those same skills had saved me from being a headline, but they weren't just for defense. They could be used to build things. I spent the afternoon at the foundation's small office, a converted brownstone a few blocks from my apartment. The staff, a mix of veterans, social workers, and volunteers, greeted me with quiet nods. They'd kept the place running while I was wrapped up in the operation. I met with the program director about expanding the PTSD K-9 program into 3 more states. We discussed grant applications, vetting criteria, and a pilot program with the VA. It was the kind of detail work that had always calmed me, like field stripping a rifle or checking a perimeter. On the wall of the office hung a simple plaque, "Service beyond service." It had been my mother's phrase, one she'd used when volunteering at shelters after our father died. I traced the words lightly with my fingers before going back to my desk. Late in the day, Marcus stopped by in plain clothes. He looked a decade younger without his uniform. He handed me a sealed envelope. "Copy of my affidavit for your records." I kept a copy for myself in case anyone tries to lean on me. I took it. "Good thinking." He hesitated. "I don't know what you're planning to do now, but if you need someone to keep an eye on things, security, logistics, I'm available." I smiled. Genuine this time. "We're starting a security training program for veterans. I'd like you to run it." He blinked. "Seriously? Seriously? Pays fair, hours are normal, and no one's going to pour anything in your coffee." He laughed, then a short, surprised sound. I'll think about it. Think fast, I said. The first class starts next month. I'd wear him down. We shook hands and he left. I set the affidavit in the foundation safe, logged its receipt and closed the door. Everything now had its place. Walking home that evening, the air smelled of rain and warm pavement. The city's noise felt like background music rather than a threat. I passed a playground where two little kids in army t-shirts were climbing a jungle gym. Their mother watched from a bench. She had a service dog at her feet. I caught her eye and she nodded once. A silent greeting between people who understood the same world. Back at my apartment, I cooked a simple dinner and ate it slowly. No phone buzzing, no notes to draft. I sat on the balcony with a glass of water and watched the sun drop behind the skyline. The light glinted off the glass towers, turning them gold for a moment before fading to blue. Inside, the evidence cabinet sat closed. The foundation files were secure. Chloe and Bradley were out of my orbit, legally bound and financially cut off. They could spin whatever story they wanted. Without access to me or my assets, it would be noise. If they crossed the line, the DA had everything ready. But that wasn't my work anymore. What remained was the work of building, not defending. Expanding the foundation, training veterans, funding therapy dogs, helping women in uniform who might one day find themselves staring across a table at someone they thought they could trust. I stood and went back inside, shutting the balcony door. The apartment smelled of clean wood and quiet. I touched the unit citation on the wall once more, not as a talisman, but as a reminder of the discipline that had gotten me here. Then I sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper and began sketching a new schedule. Meetings with donors, site visits to partner clinics, interviews for the security training program. Lines of action that didn't involve ambushes or countermeasures. The pen moved easily across the page. When I finished, I set it aside and looked out the window. The city was dark now, dotted with lights. In the distance, a train horn sounded low and steady. I felt my shoulders drop, my breathing even out. No suspense, no cliffhanger, just the life resuming its shape. Built deliberately, one action at a time. Everything essential had been handled. Now came the work worth doing. Call to action. This whole ordeal taught me that some battles aren't fought with bullets, but with meticulous planning and cold, hard facts. I handled it my way, the only way I knew how. But I'm curious, after hearing all this, what would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments below.